Plan Commission for Wednesday, January 27th, 2021. Please join us in the pledge. Thank you. Secretary Sprague, roll call, please.
Sure thing. Commissioner Villanova.
I'm here.
Commissioner Berkey. Here. Commissioner Sprague is here. Commissioner Yednak. Here. Commissioner Thompson.
Here.
Commissioner Malik. Here. Chairman Johnson.
Here. Ms. Nyes, any changes to the agenda this evening?
No changes.
All right. And I'm assuming we have no citizens' concerns and comments?
That's correct.
Nothing was submitted? Okay.
Nothing.
We have no consent items, so we'll jump right into the main event. The Plan Commission training presentation by our representative of Klein, Thorpe, and Jenkins, and the village staff. Mallory, take it away.
Hello everyone. Thanks for coming tonight for our annual training. I wanted to first at least introduce Ross to everyone. He's the director of community development. And so some of you may or may not have met him yet. At least you're now all meeting him virtually. And he may chime in from time to time if he wants to add any more examples. And obviously he's part of this community development staff that helps support the Plan Commission and all the development within the village.
I'll just, again, well, hello everybody. Looking forward to our discussion tonight. Obviously I think we just want to make one thing clear on this, is that this is in no way, this was a regularly scheduled event. There was nothing that has recently happened that led us to believe that this was needed, other than the fact that we have several new members on the board, along with some new staff members. So I know this is going to be a great discussion tonight, and looking forward to it with you all.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm just going to briefly go over kind of the little more esoterical aspects of the Plan Commission and where this whole idea comes from. It's the whole idea of planning and zoning is one of the more significant powers of a municipality, and a zoning and planning review body is specifically spelled out in the Illinois Municipal Code and is part of the village's police powers. We also derive our power here in Wheeling from our home rule authority, and also we have our own village code and zoning code within Title 19 of the Wheeling's Municipal Code to give us the authority and your authority as the Planning Commission. So what is the Plan Commission? Well, in Wheeling, it is actually a combination of several different commissions or boards. We are the Planning Commission, the Zoning Board of Appeals, and the Sign Review Commission. In some towns, and actually previously in Wheeling, these all used to be their own separate and distinct boards, and they each have their own roles and responsibilities. But here in Wheeling, the Plan Commission is combined, and here's all of these different zoning matters, which kind of makes it confusing at times, understandably, when we're shifting between zoning versus appearance versus signs. So it's because Wheeling kind of combines all of our signs, all of our review aspects for zoning and land use together within the one Planning Commission board. So in general, as a Plan Commission, you are just a recommending body to the Board of Trustees, and you do not actually approve or deny matters. There are some exceptions to this, which are minor site plan review, minor building appearance review, sign permits, and a similar use interpretation. Similar use interpretations are when there is a use not specifically defined within the zoning code, but due to the similarity of other uses within the zoning code, the Director of Community Development will ask the Plan Commission to make a similar use interpretation if whether or not you believe something falls within the scope of that use, to thus allow it to be treated similarly under the zoning code rather than having to go through a full text amendment.
Do you have any examples that come to mind?
Yes, we did one with, what was it? I want to say it was either a dance studio or it was a learning center. I think it was one of the learning centers. So we weren't sure if it was going to be under, it was either similar use to like a daycare, I believe, is brought it. It was a number of years ago we did one. I could come up and let you know specifically of what it was. It was like in the last 5 years, but it doesn't come up too often, but it comes up from time to time.
Thank you.
When you guys do have final approval authority, the applicant is always able to appeal that decision to the board, though. So there's still review available to applicants. And as part of this, as you guys are aware, the Plan Commission has the authority to adopt its own rules of procedures, which we've done for specifically public hearings. This is in a nutshell, all the different scope of your authority and areas where you exert review. It's the comprehensive plan and updates, special uses, variations, text amendments, rezonings, plan unit developments or PUDs, site plans, sign appearance, and subdivisions. So we're going to go through most of these in detail. But for text amendments, you review anything that is a change to Title 19 or within the zoning districts and zoning boundaries. You don't see every single ordinance that changes language in the village code, just those that impact Title 19 and zoning. Site plan review, the scope of that, and we're going to talk about it more in depth, includes initial approval of a site plan, major changes, and minor changes. So there's 3 different scopes of a site plan review. So you'll notice obviously sometimes that we hold public hearings. There are certain matters that require public hearing. These are PUDs, special uses, and variations. Ones that do not require are signs, site plans, and subdivisions. Public hearings are open to the public, must be published, and must allow public participation. And at minimum, during the public hearing, it has to include the opportunity to cross-examine witnesses and introduce evidence and testimony. And that is why we have those extensive rules that kind of lay out the different steps and procedure to make sure that everyone's due process rights are provided to them. And because public hearings require notice and publication, that is why we continue those matters to a date certain, so they don't have to be republished. So someone can follow along. If they saw the original publication date, they can follow along by the meetings and see when the next meeting on that item will be. So going to this, what is your role? So you are a representative of the village to review land use developments within the village to ensure that they meet the vision of the village established by the board, either the current board and the past board through existing codes and documents. Your focus is on land use and building appearance and not on business models or how someone runs their business. So it's always good to remember that as representatives of the village, it can be very intimidating for the petitioners coming before you. We've seen the range of petitioners from an experienced developer who has a land use attorney presenting to someone who owns a single family home and is looking to, install a fence or add an addition to their home. And, you know, you could be a lot of the first time someone's ever interacted with a village official. So it's always important because, you know, individuals see a board and it can be intimidating, and knowing that while you might be a recommending body, that does come with some authority. And they don't know you personally. So what you can say can easily be misinterpreted from times. So for an example, in the past, not necessarily anyone on this commission, but I've been sitting here for a number of years, have just joked with representatives about bringing in samples, like food samples, which was an innocent joke, but could be interpreted as a quid pro quo suggestion. And so that's just an idea. It's like, well, it was clearly intended to be a joke. Everyone took it as a joke, but you have to remember that it might not always seem that way to everyone. And so it's just really being cognizant of what your role is and how you are perceived by the public. Another example is making sure you are to remain and review matters as unbiased and detached as possible from your role as a village representative and land use matters, and try to avoid personal feelings. Again, these are generally innocent, but sometimes when people try to put that, sometimes when personal experiences are tied to things, a petitioner may interpret it as, again, you know, oh, you like that, so that therefore you have their vote. But if you don't personally like that, if that's not personally your cup of tea, you might not vote for them, or that was the reason for your no vote. And so you just want to be very cognizant of that and how those kind of things can be interpreted to someone who wouldn't know you personally, and this is their first time meeting you. So we'll go into a little bit more as well later about the different roles, but those are just kind of some, you know, overall things to think about kind of when you're reviewing things and talking with petitioners and asking questions, etc. And this is really weird because the camera's right in front of me, so I'm just staring at an empty room talking. Because if I turn to look at the screen where you all are to me, or to where Don is, the camera just sees my, you know, just a side angle. So sorry if this just seems really odd.
It's a strange world right now.
And I'm almost like, maybe I should have stood up at the podium so I could at least look at you guys. But the screen's here, so that helps. All right, so first we're going to talk quickly about comprehensive plans. So this, again, as with everything, comes from the municipal code. And section 11-12-5 of the municipal code gives municipalities the power to prepare a comprehensive plan and recommend, essentially, it's a plan for the present and future development or redevelopment of a municipality. And you also have the authority to make changes from time to time and to prepare and recommend plans for specific improvement to the comprehensive plan. And a comprehensive plan addresses a variety of elements regarding the future use of the village, identifying future land use, public sewer and water service, school sites, major public facilities, and expansion areas for various institutions. And as I was saying, you can amend portions of the comprehensive plan or create unique plans for one or more separate geographical or functional parts of the village. That's what the recent station area update was. It's part of the comprehensive plan that focuses on a unique geographical area of the village that we want to see and give our clear desire and signal what we want for the future development of that area to be. And that's essentially what the comprehensive plan is laying out the roadmap for developers of what we hope to see and what we are aspiring for an area. Some other examples in Wheeling are the active transportation plan, and I believe we have the industrial lane redevelopment plan as well. So those are areas that we've carved out within the larger comprehensive plan. So while comprehensive plans are helpful to consider, especially when you're looking at maybe a concept plan. We discussed this a lot in the last concept plan where it is in the station area. So there was a good discussion about whether or not that building should be more closer to the road per our discussion. And that was a great discussion to have. It gave, it's not tying anyone to it, but you're making sure that you're thinking about it and having them consider it, or what other elements of that plan can be considered, even if it's not, the front setback, like the close to the road building location. But maybe there's other aspects of the station area plan that we can pull out about the walkability or other aspects of that area. So that was a great example of how that is a good tool, but a municipality is not bound by its comprehensive plan. It is not written in stone. Not everything has to meet it. There are a variety of reasons why it wouldn't be met in every single instance. You are bound by your code more than the comprehensive plan, and it's not a controlling legal authority. It is the most relevant when it comes to rezoning, because rezoning considers whether the new zoning district is consistent with the comprehensive plan. It's one of the standards for that, versus maybe like a special use would be. All right, and so on that note, we are going, so you know what I'm gonna do? I'm kind of breaking out each area of review. So if anyone has any questions about comprehensive plans, if you want to ask them now while it's fresh in everyone's mind, you can, if you think of more later, that's fine. We can go through questions at the end. But if you have questions about comprehensive plans, feel free to shout them out. Okay, then on to special uses. Okay, so special uses are activities which, because of their unique characteristics, ordinarily are not allowed in a particular district without consideration first of their impact on the neighboring land uses and the public need for the particular use at a particular location. So it's important to remember that when the board has designated something as a special use within a zoning ordinance, it is already made the decision that that use is acceptable. And it is already a use that is expressly permitted within that zoning district as long as certain criteria are met or conditions. So sometimes, it hasn't come up often, but there are times with new uses where people are not here, but for example, because this didn't come up in Wheeling, but I've seen it come up in other municipalities, is that with cannabis dispensaries, the board made the decision that it was going to be a special use in a municipality. When an actual dispensary came through for the permitting and approval, there was still discussion in that town, a ZBA member, about whether or not cannabis use was, a good idea in general. Like that person was against cannabis in general. And at that point, the board had already determined that the use was appropriate. So having that discussion or focusing on not liking the underlying use is not appropriate, because that ship has already sailed. That decision's already been made. You're looking at how is this use impacting the area, and based on that, can those be mitigated or not? And that's what you're really looking at for a special use, because they tend to have unique or unusual impacts to the surrounding area. So we want to focus on here when we're evaluating a special use. We're focusing, the use does not mean the business operations. So it's important to remember that how someone wants to operate their business is up to them. Whether or not a business is financially viable is really their problem and not the villages and not the plan commissions. Their business choices really are not part of your review. And this can include menu items, leasings, parking spot assignments, and so those kind of things of how they're going to operate really are not part of the scope of a review of a special use. There are very rare times when operation of a business can impact the use and the standards for a special use. For example, an auto repair business. It is an okay operational question about whether or not the storage of cars is inside or not. And this is for either aesthetics or parking or storage requirements if there's not clearly abundant parking. So if they're not clearly going to meet the parking requirements and and they're planning on storing cars inside, or if outdoor storage is not part of that zoning district or part of their special use, that would be something to consider because outdoor storage does have certain zoning requirements. But it would not be an okay operational requirement or questioning to ask about where each piece of machinery is going to be located inside the building and all those aspects. How they lay out their floor plan, in general, 98% of the time is going to not be related to the actual use and the standards for review under the zoning code. And so as a... Yep.
Sorry, if I could just kind of sometimes when those uses or how a business is operated that could be relevant to the special use would be, say, a drive-through on a restaurant, where the communications device or the squawk box for the drive-through is relevant to the special use because it can have an impact on the neighboring properties. Using the example of the auto repair, how do they plan to mitigate noise? If they're using impact hammers, where are they using them in the building, or are they soundproofing the building in a certain way? Those are extenuating circumstances that where the use, how the site plan or layout of a use can impact on neighboring properties, then it is appropriate for us to look at that.
Could I ask you a related question on that then?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if this was what you were thinking about when you talked about this, Mallory, but remember we had the auto use that was on, I forget the road, Wolf maybe, he was taking over an industrial property and he was looking for variance on the parking, and I think it was also a special use. We got into a lot on what was going inside the building because of the number of cars that we thought were going to impact the building and the neighborhood and stuff. So was that an appropriate discussion or not an appropriate discussion? Because we really were talking about how they were going to lay out the inside of their building, whether they were going to be able to accommodate the volume of cars and repairs that they thought they were going to have.
That was relevant because for that specific use, they were claiming a certain number of parking spaces inside of the building, and their count was different than staff's count. And so we had to discuss it to see if what any variation amount would be, and if they could adequately park that site. So in that instance, that would be okay because, they were trying to park vehicles inside and how they were going to move around. If we had an auto repair, business that was not going to park any cars inside and say it was in an industrial area, really not near anyone, where noise impacts really wouldn't be an issue given the distance, you wouldn't ask any questions about any of the layout inside or anything like that. If you have one that's abutting in a residential area or some other thing where noise could be an impact, then it would be. So you really need to just look at the factors and the unique individual circumstances of that business. It's not a one size fits all. Well, we asked about this in this use. This last time we had an auto repair business, so I can ask about it every time going forward. It really needs to be appropriate for the impacts of that use itself. And because they had a parking variation too, that kind of delved even further into it.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, did I do it? No, okay, I didn't. So, You guys are pretty familiar with the standards. I'm gonna go through a few of them when I get some more examples here. But, so the whole idea of placing something as a special use is to allow us to look at that use on an individual basis and review the standards and impose reasonable restrictions to make them compatible with that zoning district. In order to actually deny an application for a special use, the individual facts and circumstances must show that that particular use proposed at that particular location would have an adverse effect on adjoining and surrounding properties, and this adverse effect is different and unique from the adverse effect that would otherwise result from the development of such use anywhere else within that zoning district. So due to these, and I'm going to add this caveat because that's what we're talking about on the next slide, there are not conditions that would mitigate that impact. So no matter what kind of conditions or something you put on, there's no way to actually mitigate the adverse effects of that impact. So that's kind of what we're going on when we look at a special use. And I have, don't worry, I have a lot of examples for you guys. So your standards and conditions. So, as I said, conformance with the comprehensive plan is not a standard for a special use, and so it's not a requirement that must be met for granting a special use. Just as, I don't think this has come up in a while, but just a good reminder. So the conditions imposed on a special use must be aimed at ensuring public health, safety, morals, and general welfare. And conditions should be intended to mitigate the adverse effects of the use on public health, safety, and welfare, i.e., if that condition is imposed, then the standard will be met. So for an example, one of the standards is location, nature, and height of buildings, walls, and fences, and the nature extent of the landscaping on the site shall be such that the use will not hinder or discourage the appropriate development or use of the adjacent land or buildings, and will not impair the value thereof. So if there is something that due to the site of it would impair the development and use of adjacent or value of adjacent land, and you can put up a fence to block it, that condition will meet that standard, so will make that standard be met. So that's, I have more examples because I want to kind of go through this, some, especially when it relates with site plans. I think I put them in this section. So you also want to make sure you avoid placing conditions just based on speculation. There needs to be evidence of that adverse impact or how the standard's not met. Like, for example, if you're worried about light, the lighting plan would need to actually, you don't want to just go off of speculation, well, I think that light's going to bleed over into the neighboring property, so you either need to have a different light fixture that, or turn them downwards, or, turn them off at a certain time, or whatever condition you would do to impact on the light. But they have a lighting plan that shows that the lumens don't exceed their site plan, then you can't rely on your own speculation on that when there's evidence to contradict that. Okay, so here's some examples, because this comes up, and we had a really good example recently, because I know that we kind of like separated out special use and site plan to like hone in the differences and what we talk about in each one. And there are times where aspects of the site plan relate to the conditions and the use, and it is appropriate to talk about them during that time. During the time of this, we go through the special use, and I don't want you guys to be afraid of that, just because we said a lot of these are site plan. They are site plan things, but because they relate to the use, they're okay. They're appropriate more to talk about and put conditions on as a special use. So I'm going to go through examples. Landscapes or fencing as a buffer for appearance, safety, or noise. Anytime we're talking about landscape and fencing being used in this way, for example, when we did H2O car wash, we were talking about planting that extra row of trees, we were granting a higher fence, and the trees were going to be planted at a larger caliber than they normally are, or at a larger height. All of those were to buffer the view and the sound, potentially the sounds of the car wash to the neighboring residential development. So those directly tied to to our special use standards on that one I was talking about, the location of the walls, fences, and landscaping that will help adjacent lands and buildings. Parking lot and access points. So again, it is appropriate because one of the standards talks about parking areas being of adequate size for the special use, properly located and suitably screened, and the entrance and exit drive shall be laid out so as to prevent traffic hazards and nuisances. So again, if there are specific concerns about an access point being too close to an intersection, right in, right out, left in, those things as part of the special use are appropriate to discuss, and other hazards. As Ross was just saying earlier, drive-throughs, stacking queues, and not, making sure that it is laid out enough so that cars aren't going to back up into the road. Which there are plenty of places where that might happen. And looking at that directly relates to special use because it impacts the orderly flow of traffic, potentially causes a safety problem. And so that even though parking lot layout and site plan like that is usually part of site plan, it does impact the special use. Again, lighting plan can be relevant to the special use if near residential and light pollution could be an issue. You can start talking about the lighting plan and aspects of it. If everything, again, it's only if it's an issue and this is a unique concern you need to look at to mitigate the impact. If the special use has already gone through everything and there is no issue and that you feel they've already met the standards, you don't need to necessarily talk about it. But these are the ways that you can look at it when it is appropriate to bring up aspects of the site plan into the special use discussion, and you don't need to necessarily wait to talk about all these things during the special use. We talked about for H2O car wash, a lot of these things were discussed. They were discussed during the site plan, and it would have been completely appropriate for you to discuss them during the special use discussion, and any conditions like that would be placed on the special use because it ties to mitigating the impacts of that use. Does that make sense? Any other questions on special uses?
Yeah, this is Robert again. I jotted something down where you were saying, and I think you've told us this before, but I forgot. Does the special use go with the petitioner or the property? And that question was triggered when you said that, we shouldn't be evaluating the feasibility of the business or anything like that. But I mean, I'm just wondering, like, let's say somebody came in, they had a bad business plan, we approved a special use for some function in an area, and their business folded in, a couple of months because their business plan was poor. And so then the next person could come in and try to repeat that, or does the special use expire if once the petitioner is no longer with the property?
So the special use ties to the petitioner, unless for some reason the property owner was the applicant. But if it's a tenant, it would be with the tenant. And usually the special uses don't carry over if it's a new owner. There's very limited times where that happens. Marcy, when do you guys?
I think Ross should answer this question.
Sorry.
That's okay. So like when restaurants were a special use, as many of you know, we just recently changed that. But the use did die with the user. But if in that particular case, the village did put in there and say, well, but if it's a restaurant and another restaurant comes within 6 months, the use can continue. So in that respect, if there's a restaurant and they sell the restaurant to another restaurant, and it never ceases operations, it would be able to continue. I believe in many cases, again, unless conditions are placed on the special use, that we truly believe that this operator is what makes this use function, then the use would continue with the property, provided there's no gap in occupancy.
Okay, thanks. I was like, I know that there's the distinction, I'm like, it doesn't, that's what I was trying to remember, I didn't have the code for me, thank you, Ross. Yes, if it continues with no stoppage, they can sell the business and keep the special use license. It's if there's an actual stoppage. But again, if someone has a really bad business plan and they fold, that's just the nature of business. And obviously we gave them the chance to try. And so if someone else came, if more than 6 months passed and someone else came with the exact same use idea and had to go through the special use process, as long as they met the standards, we wouldn't really ask about the business operations because, I mean, they could have a completely different model and approach to things, and just because it's the same use doesn't mean, it really doesn't impact us as a plan commission, how viable their business is necessarily.
Well, I guess I was thinking of an experience where, let's say we had some neighbors that were, objecting to whatever's going to come into this neighboring property, and we on the commission had our doubts that they were going to be able to be successful, and so we're going to disrupt the neighbors or overrule the neighbors' objections, and then it turns out they're not successful. But you say we really shouldn't tread in those waters then? That's not part of the decision process? I just want to understand. Just make sure.
No. So the question of whether or not, if you have doubts about whether or not they're going to be successful, that really shouldn't come into it. If the neighbors are raising valid objections because they're worried about the impacts of that use on them, and they're saying, this use was here a year ago or 6 months ago, and we had all of these problems because of this use, and this is how it impacted us negatively. What we can say is, what are you going to do that's different to mitigate those? We know those adverse impacts. You're coming in with the same use. You either need to do something different, we need to put conditions or changes to get rid of those, or a consideration would be that you can't have, that use is not viable there because there's no way to mitigate the adverse impacts. Whether or not it's financially viable and successful is not something we should be discussing or relevant. Neighbors being worried about the impacts of a use is relevant.
Well, that makes sense. Yeah, that made me think about, people objecting to a corner bar going up in the city. They're going to have all the late night revelers coming out and stuff. So the example you gave, that was a good example.
Yeah, so it would all depend on the use and the specific concerns. If there are concerns about noise, again, hours restrictions could be a part because you're up against a residential, neighborhood. Maybe that establishment isn't able to stay open as long as other ones, especially on certain nights. Those are an example of kind of when there are times and that's an operational aspect, hours of operation, that may be appropriate to regulate because of its unique location or the unique use. Most of the time you're not going to touch hours of operation, but there maybe a bar that is surrounded somehow by houses could be one that you regulate.
And in that instance of a bar where maybe the conditions were put on the hours of operation because maybe it was felt that they would be too loud for the neighborhood, and they were to sell that bar, those conditions would stay with it to the new owner. Now, if that new owner came in and said, hey, the previous owner catered to an 18 to 25-year-old crowd, and I'm catering to a 40 to 60-year-old crowd, and I have a piano bar and not a DJ booth, they can come back to us and request that condition to the special use be removed.
Any other questions on special uses? Now we're going to go into variations. So a variation is a modification to the literal provisions of the zoning ordinance to allow someone to do something that would normally be in violation of the zoning ordinance. The municipal code authorizes us to provide this relief to property owners if the strict application of an ordinance would present a practical difficulty or a particular hardship. In general, they should be relatively difficult to obtain and only be granted if the proponent has demonstrated that they've met the requirements of the zoning code and other applicable, all of our standards. So there are use variations that authorizes a use of land which is otherwise prohibited by the zoning regulations, such as a permitting commercial use in a residential district, or a variation which permits a multiple dwelling in a district limited to single-family homes. A lot of municipalities, though, don't allow use variations, and we don't see them very often. An area variation is one that doesn't involve a use, but involve areas like setback lines, height limitations, lot size requirements, density regulations, frontage requirements, and yard requirements. Those are the ones we see pretty often, or parking requirements. That's another one we see a lot. So the standards are generally stricter than those of a special use. We want to maybe make sure it does not affect the use of the land and it doesn't change the essential character of the neighborhood. And so overall, we have to remember also a variation runs with the land, if it is a land one. So if someone gets a setback variation, the next owner also gets that setback variation. A lot of times it's because you're putting something up and you're not expecting the next person to take it down every time. So for variations, it's remembering that the key here is scope. If we're talking about a setback variation only, and we're talking about just where a structure is located on a property, then we're not talking about maybe at that time, like the building materials or color or the use at all. So these are pretty narrow in scope. And so when we look at them, we really want to focus on what the request is and how it impacts the standards variation. We want to make sure all the standards are met. And we indicate these in the minutes of proceedings. Staff reports always lay out the standards and lay out the petitioner's response to the standards as well as the staff response to the standards. So we have that kind of all built in there. The only time is if you disagreed with one of the aspects or really wanted to emphasize maybe a standard or two not being met if you were not going to grant a variation. So you always look to see, for some key things to remember about variations is looking at financial considerations and having a reason, if it's self-imposed, usually aren't applicable. You can't self-impose the hardship. So when they purchase a property in full knowledge of the zoning, a variation that's not really a good reason for the variation. With that being said, like there are times, obviously, there's nothing else you can do. We did a variation recently on the one property on Milwaukee that is a building that was built with certain conditions that were from a very old code, and the change in the code now is not, and how things have changed developmentally, is not the owner's fault. It's more of when something is purchased, like a vacant piece of land, and someone wants to all of a sudden build something new, and like, well, we don't have any, we're limited by the constraints of how this lot is designed, and they knew that going ahead. Does that distinction make sense between the two as far as self-imposed conditions?
I think a good example would be actually the board heard it recently with the house that was being rebuilt after a fire that was in the floodplain there. Code requirement now is that there's a 2-car attached garage. when the subdivision was built, the houses weren't built with two-car attached garage. So for them to put in one severely limited or actually prevented them from building a structure on the property. That was exactly what a variation would be able to be requested for. But if that was a vacant lot that somebody was coming in to buy a house on to build today, they're buying it under the understanding of our code requirements today. They should be able to accommodate the two-car garage without a variation.
But the interesting thing about that one, though, Ross, was that they could have waited. There was every expectation that the floodplain was gonna, and I kind of feel we ended up granting that variance for financial reasons, and you guys are saying we shouldn't even consider financial reasons. That guy was saying that it's going to be a financial hardship if I have to wait, or a personal hardship. So based on what we're saying tonight, it almost seems like we shouldn't have. We should have said you can wait to build a complying property because we have every expectation that this property is going to be removed from the floodplain and it can be in compliance. The only condition we did put is that as soon as that they have to put in a two-car garage in the back or something, but
and then in that case, it would be in compliance. But that would the circumstances on that one were the fact that the floodplain is still there. They physically couldn't get the two-car enclosed parking without severe limitations on their, their property was limiting them to that, and it was out of their control. And again, the two-car attached garage or two-car enclosed parking to that property was a newer code requirement. So in that case, I don't know if the financial issues would have been, should have really been taken into consideration. But yes, the issues of the fact that it's got a floodplain constraint, the fact that it's got codes have changed from the time it was built to the time it's being rebuilt due to a fire, which again wasn't their fault. Those are relevant issues that can be discussed for a variation.
And financial considerations are appropriate at times. One of the conditions is it's no reasonable return on the property. The distinction is they're not going to be able to make as much, like a commercial user not being able, or industrial user not being able to make as much money as they want because of the restrictions we're putting on. A developer can't put in as many units as they want and thus sell more because of the setback requirements. So it isn't just because you paid more than it was worth or something like that. So there are certain times where financial aspects are, but it has to be pretty dire. And that's why we could consider it in that case of the home that Ross was talking about. But as I said, like a developer trying to fit in a certain number of units isn't necessarily, because it would be more profitable to have more, wouldn't necessarily be an appropriate reason for a variation on a setback or something like that. Okay. Any other questions on variations? All right, so text and map amendments. Public hearings are required. I think I mentioned this before any code requirements, code changes. A map amendment is when someone wants a parcel to be rezoned. So we have our zoning districts. Properties are zoned, R1, R2, R3, I1, I2, there are B districts, and someone wants to change one of those to a different zoning designation. That rezoning requires a change to our official zoning map and is referred to as a map amendment. A text amendment is the change to the text of the village's zoning code. That might be to incorporate a use that did not exist in the past. So when we added all the cannabis uses, those were new uses, and those went through a text amendment. And in general, just amendments to the zoning code when we do those, and when we did like the sign code, those were all text amendments.
we're still looking at Ross, so we can't see your slide.
He was pinned.
I've been pinned here. I don't know what I did if I did that.
You didn't do it, Ross. There you go. I can leave that for a minute to.
And we've had a number of the map amendments to fix various zoning issues where a particular property has 2 or even 3 different zones.
Yes, yes. And so map amendments and text amendments could be initiated either by the petitioner or by the village. And you've seen both, but
Yes.
that one, I think the village even initiated to, it's always better to have one zoning district per lot
Yeah.
for obvious reasons. So yes, we're trying to fix those, and make sure that everything is consistent as well. We've had, and sometimes, because there are areas where the different zoning is all close together, or weird parcels, just how it kind of came to be, and when area was annexed, and so as some properties have expanded, they've rezoned their property to all be the same use. So that's another example of a map amendment. So another thing to remember when that there are broad implications to map and text amendments because they apply to the community as a whole, not to a specific project. So when you add a new use to a district through a text amendment, all the land in that district can now have that use as an option, not just the applicant before you. So if you were, so for example, if we added, when we added cannabis dispensaries, every zoning district, every parcel was subject to potentially having a cannabis dispensary at that use, and until we got, one location, that doesn't mean, had it been just one applicant proposing that to allow it, so say had Hatch come in and propose the rezoning itself, well, it did. It proposed it, and that use now was allowed everywhere within that zoning district, not just that one location. Now, because of other zoning restrictions we have and the state has on that, it will likely be the only use within that zoning district, but if that zoning district was ever expanded, that use would also be expanded. A rezone of a lot, again, allows any of the uses within that zoning district to go into that parcel. So even though you have someone coming in with a specific use, if in 10, 15, 20 years they leave, any user within that zoning district can go into that building. So it's always important to remember that when you're considering a map or text amendment. There's always no guarantee that that use that you're specifically approving will never change. Okay, so standards.
I'm sorry, Mallory, I keep on jumping in here, but the only other thing I would say that we have to be cognizant of on any kind of map amendments specifically is that if we're rezoning an area, we have to be, and it's an existing area of town that's been in town, you have to make sure that you're not doing what the property owner would consider a taking, that you're taking rights away from them, or imposing regulations or zoning on them that will impair their ability to sell the property in the future. Those are the issues that will always be discussed. So, for example, if there's an area that's has commercial zoning on it and you downzone it to our residential zoning and it's not the request, and the property owner isn't in agreement, they could sue the village saying you've taken my rights to sell that property as commercial.
Yeah, that's an important thing to remember, and obviously something we would call out in the staff report to make you aware that we wouldn't necessarily expect you to know all of those aspects. So these are the standards, pretty straightforward, compliance with the intent and purposes of the code and the comprehensive plan and the official map. Obviously, either the physical or economic conditions pertaining to that area have changed, which make the existing zoning inappropriate and the proposed zoning more appropriate. That's what we see with kind of changes throughout the years and why it's certainly appropriate to have new zoning districts go in or uses to be allowed. We couldn't think of everything, 15, 20 years ago. We didn't know what all the uses would be out there, and uses change and how they operate change. And then obviously the proposed zoning is desirable and needed in the village. It wouldn't depreciate the use and value of the surrounding property. That's what Ross was just talking about. Sorry. And it contributes to the rational pattern of land uses, which is beneficial to the village. Okay, any other questions about map or text amendments before I move on to the doozy that is PUDs? Okay. All right, so PUDs, planned unit development. They're this unique zoning tool that promotes the maximum benefit from a coordinated area site planning by giving developers, property owners, opportunities to maximize the economical and efficient use of land that is not possible under conventional zoning regulations. The goal is to have a harmonious variety of uses and building types, high level of amenities, in a manner that's consistent with the plans, the comprehensive plans and areas for the village. A PUD typically includes a lot of zoning relief and provides both the village and the developer with more flexibility. It is typical and okay to see variations within a PUD. And those variations do not have to meet the same strict standards that we were talking about with normal variations. They're expected, they're okay, it's to make a really good, cool design and plan and layout, and as a result, we're okay with more variations. And they don't have to apply, and we'll go through this, but they don't have to apply separately for variations and go through that whole process. They do have to list them out within the PUD so that you're aware of them, but it's definitely not a bad thing that they're asking for. Now, if it's a huge thing and you're concerned about because, we have, say it's green space, and they're going down to like 5% green space or something super small, and if you have concerns about that being too much, obviously that can be part of this discussion as we'll go through the different steps of the PUD, but you're not going to be looking at the same standards, and you're not going to be looking at it as harshly or as negative or as critically as you do with a normal variation petition brought before you. So think of a PUD as a large multi-step site plan review with variations just baked into it. And we're going to go through it because there's 3 primary steps for PUDs. All right, so for uses within a PUD, they all need to be spelled out. The permitted special and accessory uses will be specified as part of the preliminary PUD application. Residential uses may be proposed for any plan for any PUD, and non-residential uses shall be consistent with any of the uses in the underlying zoning district. So residential is always allowed, even if it's within like a commercial or industrial zoning district, but otherwise it needs to comply with the underlying zoning district. And then with the exception of a PUD in an R4 district, a mix of different uses can be permitted if the Plan Commission and Board determine that a mix is compatible and necessary to achieve the objectives of the PUD. Okay, so procedures for a PUD. PUD has 3 steps. You have the concept review first, then you have a preliminary PUD, and then you have a final PUD. All right, so let's think of a concept review like an airplane ride. Well, this whole process is like an airplane ride. So concept is you're just starting the descent and you see the general outline of the plots with just the buildings placed on them. Okay, this is an airport in Marco Island. This is your 10,000 feet in the air overview. That's what concept review is. Okay, it's a required part of the process. There's no formal approval. You're just giving general feedback whether or not you like a project. High-level overview, the applicant only has to show a general description of the development concept, their general vicinity map, a stat sheet with the number and type of buildings, the pictures of the site as it is today, and then the site plan just has to show the general location of proposed structures, open spaces, parking areas, and circulation routes. Staff has, a couple years ago during the joint PC and board meeting, staff created this checklist for concept reviews that goes through very brief overview questions that are appropriate and get at the heart of the concept review that it includes with every staff report. And that should be kind of your guidepost for concept reviews.
And these PUD concepts are ones that go to the board first.
They go to the board first, then they come to the plan commission. After we're done with the plan commission, they come back to you for their actual preliminary PUD, which I'll go through what it has kind of as a more, like what that would include, which is much more detailed. It's still not even as detailed as a site plan you would see on just a site plan approval. Right. It's still preliminary, but a concept review is intended to just give an overview of the project, what they're thinking of doing. It does not require landscaping yet. It doesn't require colors, material selection, parking counts and ratios, detailed site plans. So you want to remember when you're asking your questions or even just for providing your feedback, you want to be very general and you want to be respectful of the fact that a lot of these details have not been prepared, haven't maybe been reviewed by the petitioner's staff, and it's really not fair to ask them detailed questions about items they're not required to present at that time. You know, they are just coming to you with their idea, making sure that people like the idea, that it fits with the overall design, hear concerns you might have about the project that they want to actually hone in when they're doing a full site plan, when they're starting to do their engineering, when they're looking at all these aspects. But they're not going to have a lot of answers to the questions. And every PUD concept is going to come to you at a different level of completion. And so if they show you a pretty picture, that doesn't mean that the building's actually going to look like that. It could completely change by the time it comes to you for preliminary, and that is okay because that picture is not what they're promising. They're promising the general project and what that includes. So let's go through some examples because I think that's going to be the most helpful of some of where it starts to get, you know, maybe too detailed at the concept review level. It's not that these questions aren't appropriate for a PUD, it's at what point in time it might be appropriate. Okay, so for example, with one about a layout of a building, recently, like the workforce housing one. One of the comments was, and feedback at the board level was to make all sides presentable as the back faces the train tracks. That was an appropriate comment. It's something to think about, especially that's unique to that PUD, about the fact that people are going to see all sides. So when you're designing this, remember that. What would have been too detailed of a comment would be, what color is this going to be? What materials are you going to use? What is the thickness of those materials? You know, and getting into those detailed questions that at this time, they maybe haven't even thought of or firmed up. Again, example of an okay comment, having a general concern that there might not be enough parking at the project given the information you've been given about the uses, the amount of units, the amount of people there. Based on how they've laid out their general site plan, it looks like it might be tight, there might be circulation issues. But again, remember, a parking analysis has not been done yet, and there aren't final counts. So it's okay to say, I see this and it might be a problem, so make sure you look at it. It gets too detailed when we start talking about the operational concerns about who is going to park where, whether or not they're going to have assigned spots, parking permits, etc., or any specific critique about specific parking counts, stall locations, stall widths, etc. All those kind of detailed questions that will be relevant at some point, will likely be relevant at some point, are not at a concept review yet. So again, you know, it was perfectly okay to talk and consider about safe pedestrian connection and to explore that idea with staff. But it's going too far to get, if we were to get into detailed aspects about the plans for the crossings, where all the locations would be, the different approaches on doing that. And just remembering that they, you know, they haven't gotten to that point yet. They're still looking at other options. Again, it was a good concern to state about safety and having a plan for fencing and knowing those because the tracks were there. It would have been too detailed to, at the concept review time, ask about, you know, the materials of the fence. Even getting into the height of the fence starts getting really detailed. It's definitely okay to talk generally about like the connectivity and coverage of it. And just overall to remember what we were talking about earlier is the way you ask a question and the tone of it matters, because asking it in a way of think about this, consider this as you're developing the plans versus demanding answers to questions, like and almost like, and say, implying that, well, this isn't shown on the plan, like almost you want to avoid accidentally seeming like you're accusing someone of not having these details on a plan which it was not required. And so you just have to be cognizant of the level of plan that this is at. The concept is very loose, very broad strokes. And, you know, the board may have different questions than the plan commission, and that's okay because their role is different in concept review. They may ask about money and some operational aspects because they have an additional role, which might be granting TIF requests or incentives, and so they get into that role a little differently when your focus is primarily on the land uses and the appearance and the overall site plan aspects. So that's kind of an overview of the concept review stage. Then we get into preliminary PUD. Okay, and so now we're getting down into the descent, and we're seeing a little more detailed here about where things are, what they look like. You can see the windows and the buildings and, you know, kind of like the parking areas, a little more defined, some defined landscaping. And this is more of like what a preliminary PUD is. All right, so it gives the village an opportunity to review a well-developed initial plan for the entire site before granting final approval, while also giving the applicant an opportunity to receive approval and feedback before developing detailed plans for the site. There shouldn't be significant changes to the PUD plan following preliminary approval, but a lot of the details and info will get sharper, is the best way I can describe it. It might still be a little blurry and unfocused at preliminary, but you can see everything, and then everything gets a lot sharper at final. So for example, preliminary PUD submittals requires preliminary drawings and general location of items without final detailed drawings. So this will still be less detailed than you see for a normal site plan approval when you get a site plan. You'll see the general location of the proposed structures, the description of their intended use, approximate height, open spaces, setback dimensions, general narrative of the signs, the preliminary landscape plan to including all buffers and parking lots, preliminary elevations for each building, which will include at that time labels for the proposed building materials, preliminary engineering, and again, so it's all the preliminary levels, and then final PUD is the details. And that's when you have all the final plans, and everything that's, firmed up. And they'll, usually when you see them, they go, into a lot more, they'll show you kind of what's changed between preliminary and final. And hopefully there shouldn't be too much, but there might be some as they got through a little more engineering, for example. So does anyone have any questions more on PUDs? Ross, do you have anything to add before I kick it to questions?
No, I think that's great, especially with the visuals of the planes coming in at the airport. That's really the way to think of it. Is preliminary. We're really high up, just getting a general idea. You can tell there's a factory or an industrial area. You can tell there's a residential area. You can't tell if it's if they've got pools in their backyard. The preliminary, you can begin to see more details. You can see there's going to be a landscaping area, but you don't know what kind of tree is going to be planted in there. But then when you actually land the plane, you can see that landscaping area has 3 palm trees and arborvitae.
And Mallory, is that where you fly into your vacation home?
Yeah, San Marco Island, yes, I do.
I have a question if I could.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was looking at the code. It looks like for a PUD then, there's specific, I think even size requirements and stuff. Maybe you can go through that. But just for my own clarification, so when we were reviewing the workforce apartments, that was not a PUD, right? That was just a concept review?
That was a concept review for a PUD.
Oh, that is a PUD? But I thought it had to have been, maybe was it 5 acres or something, or I forget what I saw. Okay, because I didn't think since I've been on that we've done any PUD. I thought the PUD would be like the Weston development where it's a combination of all kinds of things. So what's the difference between like the Weston development where it's a combination of things compared to that workforce where it's just the one single apartment building? They're only doing one thing on that lot.
So so a couple things to unpack. One, concept review is required in the code for both PUDs and major site plan reviews. But I went through the same aspects of concept still apply between concept and major site plan, getting to the overall things. PUDs are what the developer makes of it. So Weston was a PUD, it was a phased PUD, quite large. Town Center was a PUD. The one right across from Town Center was a PUD, or is a PUD. But so is, Ross, isn't the one up on Wolf Road, that apartment?
Wolf Crossing?
What?
Wolf Crossing?
Wolf Crossings? Is that a PUD?
Yeah, I don't know if that's a
The new
Our code
one.
specifies any development of 2 acres or larger is considered a PUD. That's the way our code does it. There's many ways to approach that. That's the way the Village of Wheeling code approaches PUDs, is that anything over 2 acres, the belief is that there might be development concerns or site concerns that we should take a little extra time and caution on them.
So it doesn't necessitate that you're going to have multi-uses on the site. It's more just the extent of the project, kind of the size and extent?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, some might have multiple uses, but some might just be a solely residential complex. That's the one I was trying to remember on Wolf. There's one on Wolf Road, I'm pretty sure, that is only residential. That was a PUD. Do you remember which one I'm talking about, Don?
The 2 on North Wolf? I mean, there's 2 of them.
The one on
Next to
Wolf,
each other.
the one on Wolf that has like those townhomes.
Yeah, there's 2
there's
side
2.
by side.
Oh, yeah.
I forget their names
I forget the
offhand,
names
but,
of them,
yeah.
but they're only residential. So definitely.
Question.
Yeah.
Can conditions be placed on a final PUD, or is that not normally done?
Yes, conditions can be placed on a PUD, but usually if you have concerns with it, they're, you know, we try to address them at preliminary to get them all wrapped up so the final is clean. If there is a use within a PUD, we've been seeing this in Town Center the whole time, that specific use will come through as a special use itself and get, you can put conditions on that too, with the specific uses for that specific building. So that's where we mostly see conditions within a PUD. We don't usually see it on the site plan because everything is usually cleaned up by final. I'm sure there have been times where it's come up.
Yeah.
Town Center, for example, there's a condition about the percentage of non-sales tax generating uses that are permitted in there.
Yeah.
That is a condition of the PUD, if you will. And it's also a condition of the development
The RDA.
agreement we have with the developer. But, you know, there's multiple layers of that condition. But that is a PUD condition that could be on there as a percentage of certain type of business or certain type of use.
So they can, but normally you try to avoid it by ironing out anything before that gets to the final.
Yes, especially appearance-related ones that you would normally throw on like a site plan, and because you have those steps, you know, you kind of get multiple steps.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, so one final thing for PUDs is there are sometimes phased PUDs, and so that's again for very large PUDs. The Weston was a phased PUD. They're common for those, and especially if there's multiple uses or pads, even, or different areas. It must first receive a preliminary PUD approval, and then each phase would be submitted for final PUD approval separately, so that it could develop in a phased manner. So we have not seen that since the Weston, because Town Center didn't.
Town Center.
It was developed in phases, but I think it was just approved as
It was
a preliminary
approved
to
as
final.
one. Yeah.
We didn't phase it out in the PUD, it just was built in phases. It had a phased building structure, plan.
We are working with the developer of London Crossing. That may be a phased PUD. That might be our next one.
Okay, so when that happens, we'll walk through kind of this again with that concrete example in mind so that it's a bit more fresh. All right, so on to site plan review. Okay, so site plan review is required for all development of land except for single and two-family residences. And so when you're looking at the site plan, you are now only considering the static aspects, the landscaping, appearance, etc., and not the use or operations of a business. So site plan submittals include site plan, landscaping plan, lighting plan, grading, and stormwater plans for new construction, and building plans. So your site plan shows your property boundaries, wetlands, building footprint, driveways, curb cuts, parking areas, sidewalks, locations of signs and lighting, and then the existing land use and the zoning of the adjacent properties. The building plans are the architectural elevations that show the building materials and dimensions. There's only required to be one colored rendering of the front facade of the principal building that shows the proposed color. So just as a reminder, they're only required to show us one side of a building rendering and not all of them are colored. Material samples for the primary exterior elements. Site plans do not include floor plans, it's just the footprints. And then grading plans and stormwater just have to show spot elevations, drainage patterns, the topography, and then the location and dimension of stormwater retention or detention. The zoning administrator can waive certain site plan requirements. And it is important to remember with site plans especially is that there are so many aspects of buildings that get reviewed through the permitting process. So the approval by the Plan Commission and Board is not the last stop for these developments. In fact, it's usually like the first stop, and then they go through permitting procedures with variety of village staff and departments that get into the really nitty-gritty details and go through inspections and have to have all those building codes, mechanical code and fire code, all those have to be reviewed and approved before they can get their certificate of occupancy. So just as a reminder that like those kind of really detailed stuff do get reviewed, they just get reviewed by staff. So scope of the site plans, so there's different. We have a major site plan, minor site plans, and amending existing site plans, and they all have a different scope of review. And this is where I think, again, you have to remember the scope of it to know kind of what you're looking at. So what's not included in a site plan review and approval, floor plans, areas of the site that are not being changed. So for dealing with an amendment to a building or for amending the site plan only includes the parking lot, and then you would not be able to require changes or discuss the building appearance or the trash enclosure if it's not included in the scope of what's being amended. Obviously, if it's a brand new building and you're looking at a site plan, then you can discuss all those things. And then any conditions you impose have to be reasonable and related again to the relief sought in that petition. As I mentioned before, major site plans also have concept review. Again, this concept review can be waived. And as previously discussed, a concept review for a major site plan would be those same big picture things. You're still talking about the 10,000 feet overview of a concept review before it gets to the full site plan. That would just have the 2 steps though. Concept review, and then you see the site plan in full. Just because we've had questions and this come up in the past, if you're looking at a site plan approval of a single tenant in a shopping center, the focus is on that single unit and the appearance of that single unit and not the entire shopping center. So again, scope is just whatever is in the application before you and not anything outside of that.
And we've had issues with that many times
Yes.
over my years.
Yes.
Where we start talking about the parking lot and landscaping that the tenant has no control over whatsoever.
Not only do they not have any control over it, they're also not asking for
Right.
that aspect of it. Or if you're talking about a lot of times we have a shopping center, they're only before you for their special use. They don't even have a site plan amendment for anything. They're just putting up a new awning or something, and discussions go into the parking lot conditions and the landscaping, and those most time in shopping center are not related to any adverse effects of that use. So that's when it's like going beyond the scope.
They usually ended up being, we suggest you talk to the property owner
Right,
and
and-
improve the parking lot.
Just so everyone knows, when someone comes in, so first they're coming through zoning to see if they can do the use, but then they're going to get a business license. And so when they come in to get a business license, zoning looks at it again, engineering looks at it, health, fire. So at that time, if they are just leasing the site, we're dealing with them, but then we also reach out to the property owner if there is like damage to the parking lot that needs to be fixed. And through code enforcement, we can deal with those issues directly with the property owner while still allowing the person who's leasing to move forward with their business and not hold them up for issues that are outside of their control.
Yeah, so there's the 2 concerns. It's either outside their control because they're just the tenant and they're leasing the space, or it's outside the scope of what they're requesting the review for. So both things do come into play when we're talking about site plans. So that's, Commissioner Yednick, you had asked that question earlier about when is it okay sometimes to talk about color or not. It really depends on, you can talk about color if you're looking at the site plan, a site plan approval that involves the building. If it's looking at a use, we wouldn't talk about a color of the building. If you're looking at something that's an amendment to the site plan that doesn't touch the building, we wouldn't talk about color. If you're only talking about part, a site plan for part of the building, then we can only talk about color of that one part of the building. So you really just gotta look at the scope of the review in front of you, and that kind of controls what you can and can't ask.
The specific question I asked though is, I recalled back to when we were looking at the owner that was moving his,
The check, cash, and pay place, right?
yeah, the cash for auto thing, and so I was asking about colors, and I was told I couldn't, but I thought that was
a
we
special-
were reviewing this. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Go
I
ahead.
thought we were reviewing the whole building, the whole site plan, so I didn't understand why in that case we couldn't talk about color, but then when we did talk about the cannabis, we went into great depth, great detail on colors. So what would be the distinction between those two examples?
If I recall, the check cash place actually only came to us for a special use and did not come to us for a site plan review.
Wasn't
But we were
it an
putting
appearance
conditions
review?
on
I don't
them,
remember
power
if it
walls.
was. Or he was only leasing one unit. He was only
He
making
bought the
changes to
building,
one
and he
unit.
was going to sublease.
The one spot.
Yeah,
And so the discussion went to the rest of the building, and I think and he wasn't looking to make any changes to the building with his amended site. So he already had a site plan because it was an existing building. He was coming in as an amended site plan. And from what I remember, he was not making any changes to the exterior of the building.
he was,
Well, no, but in that, we got into a lot of detail on power washing the bricks and,
That came in when he came in for appearance review to paint the building. So when you change the facade of the building, you have to come in for just a building appearance review. So site plan review is different than building appearance review. They can be two separate things.
if I could get my question out, I just remember at that time, during that same meeting, we were going into a lot of detail on the landscaping, the parking lot conditions, the trash enclosure, we wanted to repaint, some commissioners wanted to repaint the facade that had the striping on it. And when I brought up brick color, then I was told we can't talk about brick color. So it just seemed to me that I didn't understand why that was unique in that situation.
I honestly don't
I
remember
don't
the specific
remember.
details. It may have been, I'll look at that specific one and look at specifically, but if we stopped it at you, it's just, no one was supposed to talk about color then, and it just got to a point where we had to cut it off.
I think, if I'm remembering correctly, the petitioner came to us and said, fine, village, you pick the color. So I
Yeah.
think maybe everybody started talking about color, and then someone stepped in maybe and said, well, wait, we really shouldn't, you pick your color.
because the petitioner admitted that he was colorblind and didn't know what he was.
He didn't know, so he gave us that palette of colors.
grays.
And then we were talking about different ones. I think we were just getting nowhere, so it was pick your own color. That's what I remember. I don't remember not being able to discuss the color. I thought we
And we
discussed
did,
it late.
well, I did suggest adding a
Right.
band of color to make it more attractive.
But yeah, anytime we're talking about the building appearance and they're changing it,
It's okay to
and,
talk about.
and part of the change is changing the color. I think if they're just changing out windows or doors, then we wouldn't be right to ask them to change the color of the building. It's only if their project is to change the color, then we could have input on what the color should be.
Right. If they're going to do something that would maybe make it two different tones all of a sudden.
Right.
Because of an addition, then we would want to talk about changing, making sure the color matches and stuff. That guy came back twice though, I thought, too.
Yes,
So
That's the
at
thing.
least twice.
Because the first time he didn't want to paint.
yes, I wasn't here the first time.
So I'm not, I think
So-
I'm having different memories of each time.
Yeah, I was only here the last time.
Because the first time he did not want to paint it at all, and it wasn't up for discussion because it was not within the scope. And then the second time he came back, he did want to paint it.
That's when he wanted to paint the entire building,
Yeah.
all the way around, and I think we talked him out of that.
Yeah, he wanted to paint the brick, and we had said we didn't want him to paint the brick.
Yeah.
Yeah, just worry about the facade.
And that's when we were a little bit nervous about how he was gonna paint the building and the brick, and we got into a little more detail than we normally would if it was maybe a larger business, which maybe we shouldn't have gone down this road, but we wanted a little more information on how he was gonna fix the building and stuff, just because the building's not in that great of a shape, and we want to make sure that it didn't just get the problem areas just get painted right over. So we did want a little more assurance of how he was going to do it and to make sure he used the right products. But we do ask everyone for products and manufacturer and specifications for paint. That is typical.
So, I mean, I'll go back and look at those two items, like those 2 dates specifically, to see where the cutoff was, but, you know, just as a rule of thumb, those are kind of the different times where it would be appropriate or not, based on the scope, and so without knowing that, you know, I didn't go back and watch those meetings specifically.
You don't have to spend a lot of time on it, that's fine, it's, I was using an example I thought maybe you knew off the top of your head, but don't waste your time researching. Going forward, I think you'll just guide us in the right direction. I had another site plan review if nobody else had another question about site plan review, if you want now, or I can
No,
wait.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, you said something very interesting about that we're only authorized, or they're only required to present the front facade. And I was curious, is that in Illinois statute, or is that in Wheeling statute, and would we want to reconsider that? Because I'm thinking of a lot of recent examples. We did the site plan review of the workforce apartment, and we were talking about, you know, doing something presentable to the train station, and I'm guessing how do you define front facade in that kind of situation where it's open all around? Or the other example might be the H2O car wash, where we talked about the total building, you know, front, back, all the angles. So that surprised me when you said that they're only obligated to present information about the front facade. Maybe you can clarify that a little more.
Yes, they only have to provide a color rendering of the front facade. They have to give us architectural elevation drawings of all sides with the building materials and dimensions, but they only have to give us a color rendering of the front facade.
So we could still evaluate all the dimensions?
Yes,
Oh, yeah.
And
yes.
is that village code, and would we want to?
Village code.
Would we want to reconsider that and provide
So there are
require-
if the,
color?
the code allows staff to request additional things if it would, you know, help with the development. And so, I mean, again, workforce housing is a PUD, so it's not site plan, so it's a little different. They have different, so it's not the same code requirement. But in that example, if it was just a normal site plan, given that they have a facade that faces the back, if you really feel that a color rendering would be necessary to review it, then that would be an instance when it would be maybe appropriate to ask for that. But a general commercial building that where the back of it faces a field or a forest, you know, that to have it as a color rendering is an additional expense for someone, potentially, depending on, you know, each applicant's different. They're not all, you know, hiring huge development firms and architecture firms to do this. So it's just a reminder that we wouldn't want to require it in all circumstances. You're still going to get the architectural drawing of all sides. You're still going to know the colors and the building materials. It's just that visual aspect of seeing the color rendering. And so sometimes, you know, there are plenty of times where people present it anyways just to give it to you, but I mean, it's up ultimately to the planning commission and board if they want to change the code to require that. It would require a text amendment, but that's the rationale behind only only requiring one side and only asking for additional ones if really necessary.
I misunderstood. I thought you were saying we can only discuss the front.
Oh,
or
no,
we-
you can discuss
we
all
can
of the
only-
sides.
Okay, so that, yeah, I can see the expense part, but if they say to us, I'm gonna use the same materials that I rendered on the front, around the back, like Workforce talked about, is gonna be consistent. So that would answer our question, and I think we would, unless, they say, well, I'm gonna make the front purple and the back green, then we won't necessarily see what that looks like, but we
No,
can
and
talk.
you'll see each side on a piece of paper, and it'll say, it's gonna be off-white siding with black trim. Each picture of each side you'll see. The only thing you'll see for the front, potentially, is the flowery, kind of faded rendering with the car and the two kids playing with the ball and the dog. That actual colored rendering. Some of them aren't that flowery, but, that's kind of what I think about. That's kind of the one requirement is from the front. So a lot of places kind of mix them where they make an elevation look a little rendering like.
Yeah, they might color them in and stuff and make them look, but you'll still know that. They still have to provide you color samples for any building material, so you know what the color actually looks like. So and you can still definitely discuss all four sides, what it looks like, materials, etc., assuming that it's coming to you for that purpose.
Yeah, all four sides will be very clear
Yes.
what they are.
Yes. Okay. All right. So sign review. I'm only going to go through this really quickly because we just did a lot on signs. You're also the sign code board of review. You already handled a huge amendment to the sign code. You also review signs for appearance, review, and can grant variations for the sign code. You also these come up very rarely. You deal with some plat stuff with preliminary plats of subdivision, within developments and PUDs, and that's with altering, lots and when they're combined or separated. So we kind of have the staff report detail these a bit more, and so that you know what you're looking for. It's kind of a technical aspect of it, but just don't get thrown off if you all of a sudden see them on the agenda. Okay, all right, so responsibilities of a plan commissioner. So attendance at every meeting, studying the zoning ordinance and being familiar with it, preparing for the meetings, touring the community and visiting the sites that are coming up before you for review, preparing questions, obviously the training here, anything else. If we do this on an annual basis to just remind everyone, come up, we have a lot of developments. If we have examples that come up, I think it's helpful to tie it to something concrete. Avoiding conflicts of interest, being a positive representation of the village, and treating all petitioners, staff, and commissioners with respect. So it's just some helpful reminders. Know what you know. It's okay if you don't know everything. We have professional staff for a reason. They have gone to school, they have degrees and certifications in planning and zoning and all these things, and they are here as your resource to answer questions and explain items. It is useful to reach out to staff before the meeting with any questions for them or for the petitioners, and this allows the developers to fix their plans or have answers to those questions before the meeting, which only helps, one, the meeting go quicker, the meeting goes smoother, and potentially reduces the need to continue items to another day, allowing developments to move through the process a little quicker. It's a more professional approach at the meeting as well. Obviously, the smoother it goes, and staff, and it just makes it a little easier on everyone. You need to notify, just as a reminder for staff, as soon as possible to remove items from the consent agenda. what's our cutoff again, Marcy?
To get,
To remove an item from the consent agenda? We haven't had this issue in a while.
I don't,
we don't really
I
have
don't know
a,
that there is a
no, you can do it up to
time
the,
limit. Yeah,
at the meeting.
Okay, I know you can, but I know we, at one point, we'd asked for certain times so that we could let the petitioner know.
well, yeah.
Oh, if there's a petitioner.
Yeah.
Right, for the consent. Because we don't have them come. So like when we have signs on the
Oh.
consent agenda, we don't have them come. I'll have to look back. We had set a, well, notify them as staff as soon as possible.
Yeah,
So that way we can have the petitioner here if not, if it's not going to be on consent, because they don't come if it's on consent.
right, but a lot of the things that were on consent, like signs, are not coming to consent anymore.
Right. Oh, yeah, so I guess it won't really be a huge,
Yeah, so don't, and so if for monument signs, they still have to come.
okay.
So I'm not
Okay.
sure what would be on,
Yeah, so this might be a moot point going
yeah,
forward.
I'm trying to think what would come to consent.
It was a thing for a while. And then, as we were discussing earlier, the project is not done once it receives zoning approval. The applicant still has to get multiple permits and approvals from staff who are trained in reviewing detailed plans, and go through all of that, all of those aspects, with a fine tooth comb. So that's just always a good, helpful reminder. And especially, I mean, I would encourage, we have a generally new plan commission. Most people have not been here that long. A lot of these things may be confusing. You might not know why staff has called something out in the staff report. It is 100% okay to send them an email and ask them, can you explain what this is or why this is a concern? I'm not exactly sure. If it's not an area you don't know and you don't do it day in and day out, there's no reason why you should know it, and you're gonna learn more as you go through it. You see the projects, you hear the other, you hear questions, or you see how things are presented, or what staff calls out more or not. But until you get through that, you're not gonna know, and so it's definitely okay to ask. And obviously, if it's an email ahead of time, staff can, provide you with probably more detail than they could the day of, because there's so much going on. Like during the meeting, there's so much going on, there's other things, and some of these things obviously need to be referred back to the code sometimes. So I would just encourage you to do that with any questions.
If the commissioners do have a question, Marcy's the initial contact point. Should Steve and Ross be copied, and me?
It's not necessary. I mean, if I need to run it by them, I will, or, if you feel like copying them, you can. You won't hurt my feelings.
Okay.
But, you can definitely run it by me first.
Marcy's gonna be the one answering you.
Okay, I just
yeah.
wanted to make it
Yeah,
clear
no, of course.
for everybody.
Yeah, there's.
I have no trouble emailing Marcy or calling.
Yeah, it might be good to copy Don on questions, just so, if you want to be copied.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm not checking that particular email maybe once a day, but.
But yeah, any questions, or feel free to call me anytime. I'm always here.
And I just wanted to say that just because we're asking for questions, if you have them in advance, that in no way, shape, or form precludes anybody from asking questions at the meeting. It's just that these are, if there's things that we can provide answers for in advance, that will speed the meeting, or provide the petitioner those questions in advance, so they can either bring the appropriate support staff with them to answer them fully, or that will just speed it along. That's what we're looking for with that. In no way, shape, or form are we saying, give us the questions in advance and don't ask them at the meeting. We would like to, try to prepare as best we can, that's all.
Right, some of it might be what Ross just said, letting the petitioner know so that they, bring that person to the meeting or have an answer, or maybe even, if it's something, is like they didn't put the bicycle rack on the site plan and we want to see that, they could get that fixed right away, and then it doesn't need to be a condition. You can see where it's going to be and be okay with it, and not have a general thing like, oh, it'll be added, or and write it all out in language. So those kind of things, you would still ask that question potentially at the meeting. You would still ask that question at the meeting but it would help having that flow already.
And just so the rest of you know, I typically get together with Marcy either on the phone or in person a couple days before our meetings to go over the agenda and cover some of the questions I have. But we don't expect all of you to do that.
Okay, so I'm gonna go just through quickly. That's kind of an overview of kind of what your full role is, all the type of matters we see before the Plan Commission. I'm gonna go really quickly through Conflict of Interest and Open Meetings Act, just to kind of hit the highlights. I know most of you know them already, or went through them as part of your training. So I'm not going to dive into it too much, but just kind of as a reminder of your obligations and the rules for these statutes. And then we'll be done, so shouldn't be too long. Okay.
Can we
So-
ask questions at the end?
Yes, you can, of course, ask questions at the end. I just meant you don't have to hear me talking much longer. All questions will be answered by Ross or Marcy. So a conflict of interest, you have a duty to act in all cases except where there is a conflict of interest. And that is obviously being aware of anything that would be perceived as influencing your decision. So typical conflicts of interest are financial interests, owning, leasing, or having an interest in a property which is subject to your consideration. Being employed by a property owner, lender, or contractor for a project under consideration, or being employed by a planning, engineering, law firm, or other consultant which may be representing the proponent. So those are some examples of financial interests, conflicts of interest. Personal conflict of interest, being related to a proponent or an opponent in a case, or being a close friend, or having a long-standing personal relationship with someone in a case. Association or organization is that you're also a member of the board of directors of an association or organization, which could constitute a conflict of interest. Example, you're on the board of directors of someone requesting a variance or seeking approval from the board, or you're on the board of a subdivision or a homeowners association that is endorsing or opposing the request of a proponent. You need to actually be on the board, not just potentially living in or a member of a group. So there's two types of conflicts: statutory conflicts and common law conflicts. Statutory is really when there's a direct contractual interest between the conflicted individual and the municipality. You personally have a contract where you're going to most likely financially benefit is the issues. If you think that there is a conflict or this type of conflict, definitely call me, email me so we can talk about it. Those are very serious, and we can talk about the steps. Common laws don't necessarily rise to that. That's more like, it's the smell test. Is like, would someone looking at this pause and be like, or do they have a conflict? It just doesn't look good. It really makes someone doubt whether you can render a fair and impartial decision. And in those cases, if you believe you can't act impartially because of your conflict, you need to advise the commissioner and the commission, disclose it, and refrain from acting on the request as refraining from discussion and refraining from voting. That's what I just said. Okay, so that's conflicts in a nutshell. Really, if you ever have a question, just email me. It has happened numerous times over the years. A lot of times, they're not really a conflict, and I let you know that. Sometimes there have been, and I just say, you just, don't participate in this discussion and vote tonight, so. All right, the Open Meetings Act. All right, just as a reminder, Plan Commission is a public body that is subject to the Open Meetings Act, which means we must comply with all the requirements. meaning all of our meetings must be open to the public, with the exception of closed session, which we really don't need to worry about. If that were ever to happen, I would give you so much notice and explanation of what it looks like. All meetings must be at specific times and places convenient to the public, and a schedule of regular meetings must be prepared, which we do at the end of every year. Notice of meetings must be given to the public and news media, and requires the preparation and approval of minutes for all open and closed meetings, which is why you see us approving the meetings every meeting, minutes every meeting. So what a meeting is a gathering of a majority of a quorum of members of the public body held for purposes of discussing public business. So for the 7-member plan commission, 4 members is a quorum, so a majority of a quorum is 3. So 2 of you can meet and talk about plan commission stuff, 3 of you cannot. So now, does that mean that if at 3 or more of you were good friends and wanted to hang out, that's fine. You just can't talk about plan commission business together.
If we're ever allowed to hang out again.
If we're ever allowed to see people again. Biggest thing for meetings is that it applies to contemporaneous discussions. So group text messages would fall under a meeting. That's why we always say don't hit reply all to emails if you're not already blind copied, or that's why you're blind copied, because people like to hit reply all, and all of a sudden, you know, everyone's hitting reply all and having this contemporaneous communication of discussing a matter before the plan commission. And then like a group conference call, not that that necessarily happens anymore, would also be a meeting. It doesn't have to be in person to be a meeting. It's any contemporaneous communication. We do agendas, and so that's all handled by staff, but those have to be given 48 hours ahead of time. And notice, there's also a notice if we're making a change of the regular meeting date and time. Agenda items have to be listed on the agenda, which provide enough specificity to inform the public about what's being considered for action. We cannot take final action on items not listed on the agenda. You can discuss items not on the agenda, which is what we do in other business a lot, but we just can't take any votes or final action on it. And then if we were ever to have a special meeting though, you can only discuss what is on the agenda during a special meeting. You cannot discuss items that are not on the agenda. Minutes, we have that here, but they have to be approved within 30 days after the meeting or the second subsequent regular meeting, whichever is later, and made available for public inspection within 10 days after approval. The minutes just have to include date, time, place, roll call of the members, and then a summary of discussion of the matters proposed, deliberated and decided, and a record of any votes taken. Just as a reminder, violations of the Open Meetings Act can be up to a Class C misdemeanor, punishable by $500, a fine, and 30 days in jail, and there are also civil actions to enforce the act available. So that is my presentation today, and I welcome any additional questions you might have.
Can we take 5 minutes?
Let's take 5 minutes.
Before we get into questions?
Sure.
Thank you.
Would you like a water?
Looks like we're still waiting for two more to come back. Everybody's back now?
Everybody seems to be back.
All right. So who has questions? Commissioner Yednick, and then we'll go to Commissioner Malik.
Thank you. Thank you, Mallory. This was very helpful. Appreciate it. I think this was a little more extensive than you did last time. And I feel honored that I think I was able to participate in your training design because I think the majority of things you said what not to do, I did them all. So.
Everyone's done them. It wasn't just you.
Yeah.
Well, I personally can account for some of those. A couple of just quick questions. Who is the village zoning administrator? I'm assuming that's Ross?
Yes.
Okay, I was going through the code on that. And a zoning board of appeal hearing, have we had any of those since I've been on?
Yes, you are also the zoning board of appeals.
Well, but I'm saying, have we had any examples that would fit under the zoning board of appeal? And related to that, I'm just wondering if, maybe just so that we learn what we're doing when we're doing, if we could maybe even informally just categorize what role we're functioning at on some of the items. Because I don't know specifically if I've been involved with a zoning board of appeal hearing issue or not. And I was just wondering if we have a recent example, and then I'll know, oh, that was a zoning board of appeal.
So,
Any variation would be a zoning board action. And what we've decided, what we've talked about in staff, and what I believe Mallory mentioned earlier, is what we're going to do as from a staff standpoint is we're going to do a better job, or try to do a better job of spelling out in the staff memo. This is a variation. Here's the aspects that can be discussed, type of thing.
Oh, okay. Then that would be very, very helpful. And I guess my main question, though, and this is not to be facetious, but why do we really exist? Because we're pretty much an advisory body, except for some of the items that you mentioned. So what's the purpose of the Plan Commission, unless if it's just to save the village board time so that, if they review, but I know that sometimes they ask a lot of the same questions, and sometimes based on the questions they ask, almost seems like they may not have reviewed what we've discussed. So why do we even need to be around? Maybe you could help on that.
You hit it exactly. You are there to make recommendations to the board so that they don't, I don't want to say don't have to take the time to go into detail, but you're there to ferret out or to go through the details of things so that if they look to your recommendation, they can feel confident that it has been reviewed properly and gotten a fair case, if you will.
Okay.
yeah, these are statutory, like, your role is statutory within the Illinois Municipal Code. So there was always this intent to have a subsidiary body of the board that goes through and kind of, looks at this first and figures out all the details and does all the work. There are a lot of towns that have multiple committees that go through a wide variety of aspects on an agenda so that when it comes to the board, it's all done. So people break it down a different way, but this is one specific thing that's in the Illinois Municipal Code.
Well, that's kind of what I thought. It seems like we helped to expedite their process to some extent. And the last thing I had was just a general comment. To prepare for this meeting, I went through, which I should have done years ago, tried to go through the code and read about the Plan Commission, and I found some interesting things that I don't know if we're aware of, like the secretary we're supposed to do on an annual election, and they're not supposed to be in place for not more than 2 consecutive years. And I'm just wondering, there's a few things that I was wondering. There was, what was it, section 2.54.070, we're supposed to report on improvement regulations, or we're supposed to get a report, maybe. I think that was from staff. And then, wasn't sure how that happened, or if we're doing that. We're supposed to provide an annual report to the board. So Do we need to worry about watching our P's and Q's on some of these things that maybe we're not doing, that are in the code, and do we need to be aware of them? Unless those things have happened and I just wasn't aware in my time of service, so that was more an observation than a question. So that's all I have. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Malik, I think you raised your hand.
No, I actually didn't raise my hand. I was just touching my screen, but thank you.
Okay. Who's next? Anybody? No more questions? Mallory, I guess you did a great job.
I guess so. Do you have any questions, Chairman Johnson?
I had one and now I lost it. Must have dropped it in the hall.
I just had one last thing that I kind of wanted to discuss real quick, if that'd be okay. I think everybody can kind of agree, especially with these Zoom meetings, this is a very difficult way to conduct these meetings, not only for staff, but for everybody on the zoning board as well. And what's kind of become evident out of this is that when we're not in person, the issues that we're talking about relevance of the discussion or whether or not we should be talking about a use on that, especially in this format, we really need to, I believe, we need to make sure that it's very clear who our parliamentarian is, who the person that can be the one to step in and say, out of bounds or this is not privy to the discussion at this point. And I would just like to make the suggestion that person, typically if we're all in person, that person is Don Johnson as the chairman. But with us all not being in person, this is very difficult to do that. So if we had one person who we clearly all said this was the parliamentarian, and I would like to think that should be somebody who doesn't vote or anything along that nature, and I would like that to be Mallory if possible.
I would agree to that. And you're right, these kind of meetings do make things difficult. By now, we would have had meetings where we might have gone out afterwards for a drink or just a little chat session, not business related, just to know each other. We don't have that opportunity anymore, especially the two new guys. The only thing I know about you guys is what I read on the resumes and the applications. I don't know what you like and don't like, and, it's nice to know each other as real people, too.
On the flip side, I like the safety of the remote meetings, though. I'm not in a rush to get back on.
Absolutely. I'm not in a rush to get a crowd in here again. Normally, at least once a year, we would get one of the Park District 15-passenger vans and do a tour around the village, pointing out some of the projects that we recently approved or approved 2 years ago, and just to see what's actually going on. I don't know how much some of you get out and about in the village. I get out quite often, but it's good to drive around and learn where some of these places are. And definitely when we have items coming before us, you should go look at the property. And, you'll see that the parking lot needs work, whether or not it's going to be up to that individual to fix it. I think Commissioner Yednick, you went to Waggles to see how that turned out. Is that correct?
I took a tour.
Yeah. So it's good to get out and about, and hopefully we can get back together soon, but not too soon.
On that note, do we anticipate that going until further notice, we're still doing remote? Or does staff know if they're shooting for in-person at one of the upcoming meetings?
With us going to now being tier 1 mitigation and hopefully soon back to phase 4, the board will discuss that. Obviously, the village board is going to kind of set the example. If they go back to in-person, we can go to in-person. So they're observing and evaluating the situation as it is right now, and when they feel that it is comfortable that with the regulations that we have to follow and the protocols that the village itself has put in, such as the in the conference, in the boardroom, the panels being between everybody individually. When they feel that it is a appropriate risk, they will make that call and go back in person, and that will kind of be our cue to go back to in-person meetings as well. I don't anticipate that happening at least until March, because the next village board meeting is Monday, and then because of the President's Day holiday, the next village board meeting after that will be the first week of March. So I would not anticipate that we're going back in person at least until March.
Thanks, Ross. Okay. We do have some business to do here. We have approval of minutes of the regular meeting of January 13th, 2021. Do we hear a motion to approve?
Was that in our packet?
Yes,
Yep.
it was.
I missed it then, so I'm gonna have to abstain.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Sprague is a yes. Commissioner Yednak?
Abstain, I didn't read them, I didn't see them in the packet.
Commissioner Belanova?
Yes.
Commissioner Berkey?
Yes.
Commissioner Thompson?
Yes.
Commissioner Malik?
Yes.
Chairman Johnson?
Yes. All right, any other business from anybody? Commissioner Yednak, anything?
No, thank you, I apologize, I didn't catch that the minutes were included, so I will look closer next time. I don't have anything, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Sprague?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Attorney Maluzzi. That was a very nice presentation and very understandable, and thank you very much. I just was wondering, whatever happened to the spa that was supposed to go in at Milwaukee and Dundee? Did that die?
Mallory? Marcy?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
The spa, the big
The
spa.
Solex building.
Yeah, nothing's moving forward with them right now. Their special use was good for 2 years, so it's not expired yet. But we haven't heard from them.
Gotta be pretty close,
Well, it's been a year.
has it?
A year. I reached out to them, I didn't hear anything back, but yeah, I don't know. But I mean, there is a for lease sign out there again.
Yeah, they do have a sign up.
We do know that the property owner is actively marketing the property again. So
Okay. I would imagine their engineering group looked at it and said, no, we can't do that with that building. But, I don't know. Anything else?
That's all I have. Thanks.
Okay. Commissioner Thompson?
I just want to say thank you for all the clarification that you guys have provided for us on all these different items. It was definitely needed. But nothing else for me, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Belanova?
I have nothing, thank you.
Commissioner Berkey?
I have nothing, thank you.
And Commissioner Malik?
I just want to say thank you for that presentation. It was definitely really helpful, especially with the examples. So thank you for that. Other than that, nothing else.
All right. I just want to remind everybody that if you're going to miss a meeting, please let Marcy and I know as soon as you can. We get together and make sure we got enough people coming and all that, so everything's been very good lately. Yeah, I don't have any other business. So, Marcy, anything from you?
Nope, nothing.
Mallory, thank you again.
Yep.
I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call.
Commissioner Yednak?
Yes.
Commissioner Sprague is a yes. Commissioner Belanova?
Yes.
Commissioner Berkey?
Yes.
Commissioner Thompson?
Yes.
Commissioner Malik?
Yes.
Chairman Johnson?
Yes. The meeting is adjourned.
Good night, everybody.
Stay healthy, everyone.
Thank you for
Night.
sitting through all my talking.
Thank you.